So what is a pattern in Photoshop? Well, let me show you. Let's say you have a document. This is just 10 inches tall by 7.5 inches wide. Let me reset the ruler so we're back to inches. Okay, and it's at 300 pixels per inch. I'm going to go down to the adjustment layer icon on layers, and I'm going to tell it to make a pattern. Oh yeah, it's these guys. We were using these as textures in the brushes. Well, now we can use them for other things. And actually, if you click on it, it will fly out, and you'll see you have a whole bunch of these, including legacy patterns. I'll pen those on, because this guy showed up all the time. So what's nice about this is that we can scale this up or down, and we can take a look. Now we can see that there's a repeat, and that's simply because they have things lining up left and right across the image. So it's really easy to see that, yeah, it's just this one section that's being pasted again and again. But what's cool, if we zoom in, is that they did a pretty good job blending it together, these weird little bubble things. So there are a couple of other settings on here. Let's play with these real quick. Let's see, how would I show this? It's been a while. There we go. Okay, so if I select the move tool and I move this around, if I press the snap to origin, it will pop this back to wherever it was originally generated. So we'll go right back there. Link with layer is default. That means that if I move the layer, the pattern will move with it. And you can uncheck that. Let me double click this to go back in. And now if I move the layer around, you can see the pattern is not moving. So normally you would want the link layer on. You also have the ability to create a new pattern preset from this pattern. So if you scale something really tiny, for example, you could make a new pattern off of that. And well, in this case, we can claim that it already exists. That's odd. You should be able to actually rescale it and reset. Oh, wait. No, not in this case. Because it is an adjustment layer, whatever we do to the scale doesn't affect the actual pattern. It's simply affecting the adjustment layer, which means that when I try to load the pattern in, it's loading it off of the original. If we were doing this through a different dialog, then yes, we could create a new pattern out of it from there. And there are other places that you can apply patterns. For example, if we were to go into the, if we were to make a new layer and double click the layer styles, you'll see that we have a pattern overlay option, which allows us to load in patterns on top of things. And we can do adjustments there. And I believe here you can, not here either. It's already in the presets. Fascinating. Well, perhaps I'm misremembering. We'll go ahead and tell it okay. And, oh, wait, before we tell it okay, let me cancel. Let's do something else. I'll just take a brush and I will just make a couple of brush strokes. In fact, I believe we have, let me bring this up. I believe we have our custom brushes from last week, including this snail. So let's go ahead and do that. And maybe switch the color out for one of them and then the other one. So we can do some weird stuff like that. Okay, so we have some snails, right? Maybe we have the opacity set to 100% on some of them. And maybe we have a couple different colors. All right, so we've got some snails. Straightforward enough. Now we apply a pattern on top of the snails by going to the layer style, choosing the pattern overlay, selecting our beautiful legacy bubble pattern, and look at that. Now, because there's transparency, it's not applying it anywhere that there is fully transparent material. But we can also use things like multiply to darken it up, and we can increase the scale on this. Now the layers are linked, which means we can, when we move it around, it should move around with it. So if I tell it okay, grab the move tool, you'll see the patterns moving with the snail. But if I were to go back into the pattern overlay and unlink it, you see that the pattern is almost like below the snails, and the snails are just a window to the pattern. So that's what's going on with that. Now keep in mind, patterns can also be applied to brushes. So if we made a new layer and we went to our brush, we have a normal mode and all of that good stuff, but we should also have a pattern option in here. Let me double check. It may be because we have a custom brush. We should be able to paint with it. One moment, please, while I poke around. That's right. In modern versions of Photoshop, go to the stamp tool, click and hold, and you'll have the pattern stamp tool. Now, this is a new tool, so let me select the brush that we want, such as the Snail of Science. Now, if we get our beautiful snail here, you'll notice that we have a pattern selector up here, and we can choose, boop, our pattern. Now we're painting with our snail, and we're painting in that pattern again and again. You notice that again, it's as though we're revealing the pattern as it goes through. If you were to do this without it being aligned, it would be offset every time I click around, so it'll get a little blurred. And I also have the option to do impressionist, which is kind of amusing, but not often very useful. But it also depends on the type of brush that you're using. If we went to, for example, Cute Snail, you could see that it's applying the pattern, but it's kind of blurred out, and it's basing the colors off of the blurry version of the pattern, basically. All right, so those are some ways to apply the patterns. But how do we go about making more patterns? What's the process for that? Well, there was a version of Photoshop, I believe it was CS6, that had a beautiful pattern maker, and then when they switched over to Creative Cloud, they simply dropped it altogether. Now the best way we have is the old way, which is using the offset filter. So let me show you what the offset filter is and how it works. Let's say that I close these brushes, and we have this image where we have just A, B, C, and D on here. Now the offset filter will allow us to push things around to the other side, top to bottom, however you want to, side to side, top to bottom, whatever, it all works. Let's go over to Filter, Other, Offset. Whoa, what's happening here? Well, let me zero this out and we can take a look. Let's say we have this set to wrap around and preview on. As we move the pixels right, you can see that it's literally just popping up on the other side. And if we go up or down, we can see that it's literally just going up and down. So now I've offset this so that we, instead of having A, B, C, D, we have D, C, P, A. Now, if we were to set these back to 0, the other options are set to transparent. So as I move stuff over, all that's left is a transparency. Well, that's not particularly useful. There are times that you could use something like this. For example, if you were automating and you needed to move things over, well, there you go. You also have repeat edges. Now this is interesting. As we go in, it seems to just disappear. And as we go up and down, it also seems to disappear. And the reason for that is that I don't have anything on the edges, so the edge pixels aren't repeating. So let me press cancel real quick. And let's just do something fun, like fill this with some brush stamps here. Boop doop doop boop doop 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 boop boop doop. All right, so we've got all these snails. If we were to do the offset on this, filter, other, offset, and we were to wrap around, same process as before. But now, if we were to repeat the edge pixels, you can see the smear going on. And that's because the pixel that was touching the edge is just being brought over. So you can produce some very interesting effects with that, if you so choose. All right. So you can imagine now that what we're really after is the ability to create a pattern, set a pattern, and fill with a pattern. We've seen how to fill with a pattern. Let me show you real quick how to set a pattern and then we will create one using offset. So first things first, I'm just going to go up to this layer here that has the ABCD, and I'm going to go to Edit, Define Pattern, and that's just below Define Brush. And we'll call this Offset Demo 1 ABCD. And OK. So now if we go back to our giant file here, and we do fill. Now there is one other fill I forgot to show you. While we could do the pattern fill, we can also go Edit, Fill, and then use a pattern. And now what's neat about this, and what makes it different from everything else, well, first we can just fill it with like our bubble pattern, or we can fill it with our new pattern, Edit, Fill, ABCD pattern. We see we have the ABCD just going across. Now notice that I can't move this around like I could with our other pattern fill. Oops, I'm on the wrong layer. Our other pattern fill, because there's just one fill. It's just a standard fill. So why would you want to do the fill? Well, let me show you something pretty neat. Edit Fill on a new layer. We have something called Script. Now we have options like symmetrical fill, brick fill, crosswave, place along path, random fill, spiral. Let's do a spiral. Check that out. We can fill in patterns that we create, and we can do crazy things like keep them upright. We can have color randomness if we want it or not, and brightness randomness if we want it or not. This allows us to create very different types of patterns going in, and some of these are actually pretty useful for backgrounds of things. When you need a quick way to build like stuff flying all over the place, you could write out some text to find a pattern, fill the pattern with the random stuff, and then it looks like some character is having a panic attack. You just draw in or place in a photo here of someone holding their head, and then put these around, and boom, you have like one of those is anxiety getting to you type of things. Well, yeah, so that's what's useful about that one. That said, this particular pattern isn't really a pattern. I mean, it's coming down, but it's not like, say, our bubbles here. Oops, our bubbles here. And you can see that it also just has a solid background on it. So a few things to note. If we were to create a new layer and fill it, Edit, Fill, hello, Edit, Fill, there we go. Pattern, and then not with the script, just tell it okay, it's set to white. So when we captured this, notice that it had that white background. Let's do a quick experiment. Let's say it had this background. Edit, Define Pattern. Notice that it's grabbing the background, but now this will be a little more interesting. Edit, Fill, Pattern. The transparencies still exist. So if we had something more interesting, like this spiral, below it, we can see that different levels of opacity and transparency will affect the pattern when you capture it. So just to let you know on that. But again, these don't really look like repeating patterns. We can see that it's essentially just like a copy-paste job, going left and right from top down one row at a time. We really want a way to be able to stitch all of this together and make it feel like a single thing that's going along forever. Well, that's where the offset pattern comes into play. Let's grab our snail and make a new layer. And then let's go ahead and, let me not do that. Opacity 100%. I think which snail do I have? Let's grab our brush by going to Window, Brushes. I want my cute snail. All right. Now let's shrink this down just a bit. Close that up. Click, flip, click. All right. So we've got a snail. Now, if we were to do an offset by going Filter, Other, Offset, and make sure I wrap around, I've made enough space in here to put something in the middle. Let me go ahead and tell it okay. Let's pick two new colors. Maybe here. X on the keyboard to flip the active colors around. And maybe here. All right. Now look at this. There's enough room for another snail without even touching the previous snail. Click, X, click, and we've got 2 snails. Well, what if we want a background on that? Not a problem. I'll just grab my magic wand tool, which is just W on the keyboard. Click in here, voila, invert, Control-Shift-I, make a new layer, pop it down, and I'll fill this with, say, black. Alt-Delete. Okay, well, there we have it. We've got some snail action. Now I have both of these visible, so if I go up to Edit, Define Pattern, I will have a snail pattern. Offset Demo, snail pattern. Now if I come over to this big one, let's use the adjustment layer this time. Flyout pattern, snail. Now check this out. We have repeating snails forever. Now that's more of a pattern like we'd expect. Now the reason that this is working, turn that off. The reason that this is working is that the snail over here, these pieces are completing new snails. We know, let me grab the marquee, that our actual pattern is something like this. It's just one square. Whoops, just do this real quick. Let me rasterize by right-clicking and telling it to rasterize layer. All right, and I'll copy, paste. So our pattern's actually this piece, but it's repeating across, and as it repeats across and then down, it's building an entire snail for us. So this green snail is being rebuilt based off that pattern. Based off that offset, having cut it up into little pieces. So we can work off of that to start building new patterns. Let's say I make a new layer here, and I get another snail, and this time I make the snail, say, smaller, and we'll do orange. Oops, actually before we do that, let me flip my colors around. We'll do orange and maybe cyan. All right, so cyan, orange, and we've got another snail. And now I don't want the snail there. I want it to really be like over here, you know, going across. And that's not a problem because we've got offset. So I'm going to go up to filter. Now remember, I can replay the previous filter by going filter offset, but that will just redo the settings I had on the green snail. What I really want is to go to filter other offset, and notice these 3 dots. That means it'll bring up a dialog. Now I can control this, and what I need is a different vertical offset. Here we go. We've got one small snail, and now I'll make another layer, and I will pick 2 new colors. Let's go for a green. Oh, we've done green. Oh, we've done a lot. Let's get some swatches. I'll pick some colors this way. Here we go. Oh yeah, we'll do a yellow, and whoops, I keep missing the X key, and we'll do magenta. All right, brush, click, X, click, and we've got another snail. Now I'm going to go up to my filter and offset on this new snail. And I forgot to do it correctly. I need to go to filter, other offset. There we go. Now you're noticing how tedious this seems. This assignment takes a long time, so don't put it off to the last minute. Get started on it early so that you'll be able to work on it. I'll tell it okay, and give yourself enough time to work on it. I'm going to control click on this to grab the, no, I'm not going to do that because there's some transparency in here. I'm just going to magic wand this, Control-Shift-I, D to get black up front, scroll down, click on this, Alt-Delete, Alt-Delete to fill, Control-D to deselect, mouse up to this top layer, just because out of paranoia. And just a heads up, if you're on a very, very, very old Photoshop, you'd actually need to have everything flattened in order to do this. On new versions, you don't have to. But if you happen to be on an old one, my go-to is Control Alt Shift E, or actually it's Control Shift Alt E, but whatever, and we'll produce a duplicate. And then you, on this one duplicated it's sorry, not just a duplicate, it's a flattened duplicate, I would create a pattern. But it doesn't matter on current versions. I just, you know, have whatever's visible and then go Edit, Define Pattern. Out of paranoia, I always click the top of the stack. I've got offset, more snails. And the reason is that on some software, not necessarily Photoshop, if you don't have the top of the stack selected, when you do something, it will just start at the point you're on and then get everything below it. And I want everything all together. So let's go ahead and fill this. And I'll just make a fill again with the adjustment layer pattern. And that will give me the opportunity to shrink it down a little bit. Now we start to notice something a little bit interesting. Because of these snails going around, it's easier to spot the pattern here than it was here. These feel like maybe it could be a diagonal rather than an up and down, left and right kind of thing. Or it could be a row of purple and then a row of green. But because now we've got all of these everywhere, we start to notice that maybe this pattern is repeating, and it's a little easier to spot where it might be repeating. I've heard this referred to as lineups, and so if you have a lot of little elements lining up like that, you may want to dodge it by breaking it up. Think of it like a game of Sudoku, how you can't have the same thing right above another thing. Well, in this case, what you could do is actually use this pattern again and offset it a little bit more. So here's what I'm talking about. Actually, we'll make this a new video. I'll see you in the next video because this one's starting to run a little long.